Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm just very excited to get to talk to you about sort of the end of this study. I collected this data from 2008 to 2012, and I think the last time I gave a talk at Princeton was like in 2012, right when I had just collected the data, and and I didn't have much to say. So I'm glad to be back here now when I have so much more to say. So I can't remember if you mentioned the title, but Perceptions of Partner Pressure for Undesired Pregnancy in Young Adulthood. So as you mentioned, my big picture is what do people want, who gets what they want, and why. And so today I want to talk about one piece of that and focus in on one specific puzzle. Then I want to tell you about this data that I just briefly mentioned, and then I'll jump into the meat of the talk, which is to learn about perceived pregnancy pressure. So the puzzle for today, and actually it's a broader puzzle than just today, but so why do young women have unwanted pregnancies despite widely available effective contraception? And this question has really stumped us as demographers and continues to stump us. So as a result, a lot of explanations have zoomed in on measurement error. Economists have talked about revealed preferences. If you had this baby, you must have wanted it in some way. Sociologists have talked about a lot about measurement error. We're not measuring this right. So things we're calling unwanted are actually things we were ambivalent about. Advocates have talked about the meaning of pregnancy goals and whether it means the same thing to different people. And also, highlighting that maybe some people don't even want to plan their pregnancies or want their pregnancies. So there's also been a lot of conceptual confusion. So are we talking about what people want? Are we talking about what people plan to do? Are we talking about what people expect? So a lot of different concepts in this research space that have been batted around. I want to focus today on what young women want. I'm going to focus on young women because that's the data I have, but I want to focus on desires or what people want. A lot of things keep us from getting what we want, right? I don't know about you actually, but a lot of things keep me from getting what I want. Uh, Sometimes I just don't get what I want. And so I might want it, but something gets in the way. And so I don't even plan to go after it, right? So those things are those things get in the way of translating desires into outcomes. And we do know that there are a bunch of things that get in the way for pregnancy specifically. Whoops, like institutional constraints. So contraception is differentially available depending on where you live or who you are. Title 10, the subsidized contraception for poor women program in the United States is just shriveling up over time, the attack on Planned Parenthood. Social norms and meanings also. So someone might want to have a baby or want to avoid a baby, but young parenthood is more common or acceptable where they live or in their family or in their networks. Of course, life course gets in our way as well, right? So some paths you get on in life take you in directions not necessarily that you always want to go. And so, you may be, not that this is something you don't want, but you may be enrolled in college and that's directing you away from a young pregnancy, even though you might want one. What we don't know very much about is partners. And so I keep this red asterisk here to remind myself at this point to say, today I'm going to talk about heterosexual couples because pregnancy is quite different depending on body parts, right, in couples. And so the risk of pregnancy, we would need a different model, a different framework. Some of these things would still be at play for queer couples or for couples where we're not talking about two cisgender heterosexual people, but that's what I'm going to talk about today. Not that it's those other groups or people are not important. They are extremely important, and I'm very interested in how they negotiate what partners want as well, but not today. So what about partners? So one of my big motivations for this study more broadly that I'll talk about was from Kathy Eden and Maria Cavalis's book, Promises I Can Keep, where they explained how "I want to have a baby by you" was part almost of the courtship ritual for a lot of the women in their study. And this really motivated this study. I wanted to learn about the relationships that young women are in when they get pregnant, especially these young women. And so, of course, there's been some work on pregnancy coercion. There's some work on contraceptive sabotage. Of course, there's work on coerced sex. A lot of this work is, as it relates to pregnancy, is based on research in domestic violence shelters or reproductive health clinics. And so we don't know that much about a broader group of people in terms of what kind of relationships they're in if they experience pregnancy coercion, or what I'm going to talk today about, pregnancy pressure. There is some survey data on broader populations suggests that young women, especially young women, perceive their male partners as more desirous of pregnancy than they are themselves. This is mostly cross-sectional data, and so we don't know much about kind of the scenarios that this occurs in, and then how it plays out over time. Does it actually lead to pregnancy? I have to stick to my notes because otherwise I'll babble on for too long and then I'll run out of time. So I'm just trying to stick closely to the script here. So when we talk about couples and pregnancy pressure, we're talking about power. And so I'm not talking about like power with a big P. I'm just talking about power. Who has power? And so when I talk about power here, I'm talking about the ability to influence another person's goals, plans, or behaviors, as well as the ability to resist that kind of influence. And so when we're talking about power in couples, dyadic power theory has three interesting points that I think are highly relevant to pregnancy pressure. Power is a property of a relationship, not an individual. So you may be a powerful person in some of your relationships. You may be less powerful in other of your relationships. I have a lot of power over my kids because they need my money, right? But I have less power over my partner because he really does not need my money. He needs me for other things. So you may be powerful in some contexts and not in others. Perceptions of power are crucial. And so that is an insight from dyadic power theory from the 70s. And I'm gonna make use of it today because that's what I have, is young women's perceptions about what their partner wants. And dyadic power is most relevant when goals conflict, right? If everybody wants the same thing, there's no power struggle. No one needs to win. Everybody gets what they want. So let me talk to you about this concept of pregnancy pressure. I had pregnancy coercion in the title, and one of my colleagues talked me out of pregnancy coercion because all I really know is this woman's perception that her partner wants her to get pregnant. I don't know what he does, although I have some clues, and I'll talk about that, to actually coerce behavior. So all I mean here when I talk about pregnancy pressure is one partner has no desire for pregnancy, and she perceives the other partner as having some desire for pregnancy. I think of this as time varying. So actually pregnancy desire is sort of time varying. Okay, I can't go off on a tangent there. So I think of this as a thing that varies depending on circumstances. So it's time varying. Okay, so three quick pieces of background because I have so much data. I'm happy to talk more about these kind of ideas at the end if you want to question them or dig into them. But three pieces of background that I'm drawing from in the paper version of this talk. Who wants to pressure their partner? So, sorry, now all my notes don't fit on the note screen here, so I'm going to switch to paper. Cultural scripts for masculinity emphasize virility and fertility for male status, especially in heterosexual couples. Fatherhood is this visible confirmation of your masculine identity, and sometimes it can be proof of control over your partner. But also life course theory, just basic life course theory, underscores fatherhood as culturally valued and a milestone signaling adulthood and also respectability. And so we think this is probably especially salient in contexts of economic restraint when there are not a lot of other pathways to being treated with respect or being considered an adult. Also, young women, young people, young men and women alike with difficult childhoods, one of the goals that they frequently espouse is to have a happy family, to get away from the unhappy childhood and form their own happy family. So these are some of the reasons that the men partners of the women in my study might want their partners pregnant. And I'm sympathetic to this. Although a lot of these guys I'm going to talk about today are not the greatest partners. I do not at all mean to say that that no one should want pregnancies in young adulthood. Pregnancy babies are good. But who feels empowered to pressure their partner to become pregnant is really a bigger question here. When does partner A not consider partner B's desire when forming their own desires for this dyadic outcome? So specifically, when do men feel like their desire for pregnancy is important enough that they can communicate it to their partner despite their partner's complete lack of desire for pregnancy? Oops, can advance here. So who feels empowered to pressure their partner? And here, social exchange theory will point us toward, within a dyad, these three bases of power that you can draw from to be powerful in your dyad: status and resources, and differences in status and resource, right? I'll talk a little bit more about that. Differences in relationship commitment and perceived alternatives, right? So how much do you, how many other options do you have if you lose this partner, if you piss this partner off? And then also, how much do you depend on this partner? And then gendered power theory adds layers onto this, the idea that heteronormative ideas about gender regularize women's dependence on their male partners, right? For economic support, for emotional support, and social support. And so that really reinforces power asymmetries that favor men, and it also buffers men from women's power. So that's one reason why men might feel empowered to pressure their partner, or a set of reasons, I guess. And then lastly, who wins? Whose desire wins out over the others? And so those same power dynamics, those bases of power, status and resources, alternatives, dependence, the same things that embolden men to pressure their partners also make them more likely to be successful. And also, we know that if men are more powerful than their partners and they disagree with their partners about something, they can use coercive control. And so assaults, threats, humiliation, intimidation to get what they want. And so research on pregnant women in domestic violence shelters that I mentioned before suggests that pregnancy coercion and domestic violence do seem to co-occur. And then when pregnancy coercion becomes part of this strategy of coercive control, it becomes what Mike Johnson calls intimate terrorism. So is pregnancy pressure a piece of that kind of scenarios is one of my questions. Okay, so that was part one. Happy to talk more about any of that. I'm kind of in the thick of working on this paper, so I absolutely welcome your comments and suggestions and pushback on any of these ideas. The data, on the other hand, are long collected, so but I'm happy to hear critiques of these data and suggestions because I would like to collect more data, but this is done. So let me tell you a little bit about it. This data collection project had three parts. First, a baseline survey that was based on 1,003 young women who were ages 18 and 19. And whenever I have this little red star here, that's just my reminder that there was some detour I wanted to take. And this is that in Michigan in 2008 and 2009, you could not change your gender on your driver's license. It was your sex assigned at birth. So all of these people in my study were assigned female at birth. We then had this sample, and it was based on driver's license records and personal ID cards, and we invited these sampled people to participate in the Michigan study of young women. So I don't know if people were assigned female at birth, but I did not identify as women. I'm guessing they had, if there were any in our sample, they may not have participated. Based on, so we have these weekly surveys, which invited comments at the end. Is there anything else you want to tell us? Over 175 semi-structured, in-depth interviews with different people. No one ever said, hey, I'm not a woman, I'm a man. So I think these are cisgender women respondents. It's possible that they're not entirely cisgender women respondents, but back in 2008 to 2010, I think it's likely that they are all cisgender women. We picked the sample in Genesee County, Michigan. Genesee County is where Flint is, but also, so everyone knows Flint now. At the beginning of my study, no one knew where Flint was, but now everybody knows where Flint is. This county has a lot of diversity within it. So there's a large Black population, there's a large white population, and there's a lot of SES mix in both populations. So there's wealthy white and Black people, and there's poor white and Black people. And we picked it for that. That was one of the reasons we picked it. It was also close. And I did a lot of these interviews that I'm going to talk about today. I did a lot of them myself. So it started with the baseline survey, which was 50 minutes face-to-face. Professional interviewers at the Survey Research Center at the University of Michigan interviewed these selected women. For those that we could find, we had a 93% response rate. Gasp, because that never happens anymore, right? It was actually 84% of women we sampled, but among those we could locate, we got 93% of them. Some of them, like the driver's license lists, are almost immediately out of date. So some of them were probably actually not still in Genesee County. At the end of the baseline survey, we invited them to participate in a follow-up study that was weekly surveys for 2.5 years that were about 5 minutes, either online or on the phone. Back then, at the beginning of our study, only about 15% of young women in the study had any kind of smartphone. It's hard to remember those days, but so they basically logged into, with desktop computers, logged into website and did the interviews that way. So at school, sometimes at the library or at home. All in all, we got 58,594 of these weekly surveys. 952 of those 1,003 women completed at least 2 weekly surveys. 75% of them stayed in the study for at least 18 months. So I think we have quite a nice participation rate, which I'm not sure I could replicate today. In terms of the sample, as I mentioned, the county is about 1/3 self-identified Black or African-American respondents and 2/3 white racialized respondents, and that matches the county. We had 13 women who identified as, I am a lesbian, I am not attracted to men. About 2.3% of the sample. Not everyone answered this question, which is a separate story. A fair number of them were not exclusively heterosexual, though, almost a quarter, sort of, I guess, as expected. But the vast majority of their partners were men. Before the study began, about a quarter of them had already been pregnant. 2/3 of them had penile-vaginal sex in the past without contraception, and about 1/3 of them were living with a cohabiting partner at baseline. During this study, more interestingly, they reported 2,704 unique relationships, so about 2.7 on average. 196 of them reported 232 pregnancies with 204 different partners. Less than 10, fewer than 5 women had 3 pregnancies. Some had 2, most had 1 or 0. So a lot of action during the study, 2,700 relationships, some of which were ongoing at the baseline. Then the third part, so we had this baseline survey, then we had the weekly surveys, then we had this third part, which was in-depth conversational interviews with a subset of 77 of them. During the study, this was so cool. Every day, I had a smartphone. Only 15% of them had a smartphone, but I had a smartphone. And every day I would get this email, and it would be the first thing I would look at when I woke up in the morning, roll over, grab my phone, and I would get a list of everyone who changed pregnancy status in the past 24 hours. And we interviewed not a random sample, but we interviewed them over time as we could schedule them and had people. So throughout the study, we interviewed the ones who got pregnant. And then at the end of the study, they rolled out over a period. They rolled in and then they rolled out. We did 32 respondents who were like the pregnant respondents in that they were also at risk of pregnancy. So they were not, they were not the girls who had an IUD for 2.5 years. They were not the ones who never had a partner. And for the most part, they were not the ones who had extremely vigilant pregnancy desires, zero desire for pregnancy, plus strongest possible desire to avoid pregnancy. So vehement antenatal desires for the entire study period. No, those people, I wanted a sample of interviewees who were more at risk of pregnancy than that. And so we had 32 of them. A lot of them had prior pregnancies, so their stories also make it into this analysis. But basically those interviews focused on their relationship histories and to the extent that it was relevant, their pregnancy history, how they felt about their pregnancies, how they felt about their relationships. Okay, excellent. That's the first two pieces. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm completely used to being interrupted. You grow up in a pop center, you get used to being interrupted. So now I'm here at the empirical data, which I think is the good part. And so first I want to just talk a little bit about what pregnancy pressure looks like how do people talk about it? How prevalent is it? Next, I want to talk about the scenarios in which it occurred, and I'm going to talk about individual characteristics and partner characteristics. And then I'm going to talk about relationship characteristics and relationship dynamics, because that's the cool part of my data is that I know what happened week to week, right? Third, does it work? And then, so how does it affect pregnancy, subsequent pregnancy rates? And then lastly, just a peek into how does it work? So what does it look like? I want to introduce Samantha to you. This Samantha is the first in-depth interview I ever did in my life, in one-on-one in-person interview. She comes up in my research all the time because she illustrated so many things I was interested in. When I interviewed her, she was in the pregnancy sample and she just had a miscarriage, but she had not told her boyfriend or his family. She said to me, "I haven't told him yet because he's so happy and I don't want to hurt him." Well, I'll tell him one day soon. They want to start buying baby clothes, meaning his family. And I said, "Oh, did you want to be pregnant?" She said, "I do, but because I'm in school now," she was in beauty school, "and I only have until April to complete. April will be when I complete my classes and I want to get started in, mothering. I have my place, her apartment, which we were sitting in, as you see, but financially it's kind of low right now. We were sitting in the only two chairs in the apartment. And she said, "So I'm waiting until I get enough money saved up and I feel I'm comfortable and ready, fully ready, as in financially too. Once that happens, I can supply my own transportation and maybe we'll think about it and see if marriage comes into the picture too." She had a fully developed set of reasons why she wanted to wait to become pregnant. Her partner wanted her to become pregnant now. I'm going to return to Samantha and actually these next two that I'm going to talk about as well throughout the talk. So basically, I saw two kinds of perceived pregnancy pressure, and one type was inferred. And so let me tell you about Rebecca, who was pregnant, and I asked her, "Were you guys trying to get pregnant when you did?" And she said, "I wasn't. He was. He trapped me." And I said, "Oh, how's that work?" She said, "He tried to trap me. Like, I don't know how. He knew what he was doing. Like, all through when I was pregnant, this was her second pregnancy. She had a prior pregnancy with a different partner who was killed while she was pregnant. And then this new current partner stepped in, and she had her relationship began while she was pregnant. She said, all through when I was pregnant, in that first pregnancy, we were using condoms. And all of a sudden, I'm not pregnant anymore. Condoms don't exist. So I say he tried to trap me, and it worked." And I said, "Well, did he ever tell you he wanted to have a baby with you?" She said, "No, but I think he was just saying that." Well, he never really said it like that. He just said he doesn't want no more kids, and yet we're still doing it unprotectedly. and you not pulling out or nothing. So I believe he wanted to get pregnant. So this is her also fully formed rationale about why she thinks he wants her to get pregnant. He did not say so in so many words, right? Although later she'll go on to tell us why she thinks she is correct in this perception. Hannah was a different young woman who illustrated another kind of explicit pregnancy coercion. She said, I would lie to him and tell him that I wanted a baby, but no, there was no way. He could, I think that was the reason he was staying with me, is because he wanted, he'll tell you he wants a football team. So that was Hannah's story about her partner who wanted her to get pregnant. So back to the survey data, I have 3 questions on pregnancy desire that I'm going to talk about today, and then I'm going to use to measure pregnancy pressure. First, how much do you want to get pregnant during the next month? And then slightly later in the short weekly survey, how much do you think your partner wants you to get pregnant during the next month? And then at a completely different part in the survey, in the past days since the last survey, has partner told you that during the upcoming month, he wants you to get pregnant with him? And that was a yes or no question. The desire questions run from 0 to 5. And part of the reason I did this is because if you force women, especially young women who are not really supposed to want pregnancies at this point in their life course, you force them to say yes or no, do you want a pregnancy? They'll say no. But if you give them this range, they might give you a 1, even when they would otherwise give you a no. And so what we found, my colleagues and I, over the course of analyzing this data over the past 10 plus years, is that anything but a 0, you're getting pregnant. So pregnancy desires required this form of vigilance. And so we also asked a separate question, how much do you want to avoid getting pregnant? And about 2/3 of the women in the study said, I have absolutely no desire to get pregnant, and I have the strongest possible 5 desire to avoid pregnancy every single week in the study, 2/3 of them, and only 10% of them got pregnant. Any of the other group of women, no one said they wanted, no one was a 5, I really want, and a 0, I have no desire to avoid every week during the study. It was actually quite rare. But anything but that, even once, 40% of them got pregnant. So the measure is quite predictive of pregnancy, and anything but a 0 is really kind of the key. So I'm going to code perceived pregnancy pressure as if the respondent herself gave a 0. And this is a weak level measure. So if she said no desire for pregnancy, then if she said yes to either of these questions, does your partner want you to get pregnant? Has your partner told you that he wants you to get pregnant? I'm going to code that as a yes for perceived pregnancy pressure. So in the actual data, if I cross-tab these 2 concepts, in the 32,227 partnered weeks, you first see in 85% of weeks, the respondent herself had no desire for pregnancy, and she perceived no desire for pregnancy from her partner, verbal or inferred. These weeks, when the respondent had any desire for pregnancy, it's pretty rare, but those are not relevant here. I'm going to cut those. What I'm going to focus on is of these 29,185 weeks when respondents did not want pregnancy, I'm going to focus on these 1,740 weeks when they perceived their partners as wanting pregnancy. Although this was infrequent, right? So 6% of weeks, once we cut down to the sample of 29,185 partnered weeks from 868 women when they had no desire for pregnancy, there was no pregnancy pressure, no perceived pregnancy pressure in 94% of the weeks. You can see sometimes it was inferred, sometimes it was verbal, sometimes it was both. But if we look at this at the woman level, it was quite prevalent. Only 59% of women never experienced any pressure for pregnancy when they didn't want one. 22% of women experienced both inferred and verbal pregnancy pressure. So happy to talk more about that. Where am I here? Sorry. There's three screens here. We don't have presenter view at Indiana. It's like they don't even honestly know it exists. Seriously, it's very frustrating when teaching. So when does it occur? So that was kind of what is it? What does it look like? How common is it? Here we are now. What are the scenarios when this happens? And so first, I want to talk about individual and partner characteristics. Remember, these status differences are relevant for power. And then I'm going to talk about relationship characteristics and dynamics. So what I have here are between, within, so sometimes affectionately called hybrid models, logistic regression models of probability of perceiving pregnancy pressure. These hybrid models are fixed effects at the small level and random effects at the big level. So I'll keep talking about that. So the way the data is set up for the between and within respondent models, we've got green circles, which are respondents, and they each have relationships. So respondent 1 here has 6 relationships, respondent 2 has 2. They last different amounts of time, so it's messy. Then between and within relationship models, where we're talking about relationship characteristics, each one of these relationships becomes the unit now, and they all have varying numbers of weeks inside of them. So still messy data, but two kind of separate approaches to answer two different kinds of questions. So the first kind of model where we're looking at differences between respondents and then within respondents across their different relationships. This focuses on stable characteristics of the respondent and the partner, and I'll show you on the next slide. And then once we look at the relationship level, we're talking about differences across relationships in their average situation with these dynamics, and then the weekly dynamics. Okay, so there's a lot on this slide. My apologies, I crammed all the results into 2 slides, but I'm going to walk through them. So what we have here is the adjusted, so model-based average marginal effects on the probability of perceived pregnancy pressure. This is at the relationship level. The dependent variable, yes or no, is at the relationship level. So what kind of respondents experience perceived pregnancy pressure in what kind of relationships? So first, the blue bars are the average marginal probability at the means. So just like across the sample, 23.7% probability of experiencing pregnancy coercion or perceiving pregnancy pressure. The probability is about 23.7%. But if the person is older than age 18, that tacks on another 7.4% probability to that 24%. So plotting both of these bars can give you a sense of like how big of a deal is a 7% increase, right? So it's a good chunk. Partner respondent age difference. I've tried to code this a lot of different ways and it doesn't seem to have any predictive power. So coded continuously, it's a very marginal, tiny substantive effect. If both, so here I have an interactive variable on the 2 partners' education. In the reference category is both partners have high education, and here in this very young age range, it means they're both enrolled in college or they've completed some college. And so what we see is these are the 2 bars for respondent being low education, and this is the bar for respondent is high, partner is less, and then the reference category is respondent, or they're both high, right? So what we see is respondent's low education tacks on some probability to that average, but especially if they're both low education. So it's sort of an interactive situation there. Respondent's own low education, and then even more so likely if the partner is also low education. Then I have this set of measures. I don't have it for partners, but I have it for respondents. So picture average partners and respondents. So I have these measures of basically like attractiveness, and these are interviewer rated. So whether the interviewer thought the respondent was very, very attractive, whether she thought her personality was very attractive, whether she thought her cognitive ability, so her understanding was good, whether she thought she was articulate. And then also some survey measures of financial, do you have enough money to pay your bills every month? And do you own a car? The only thing that really contributes to the probability of perceiving pregnancy pressure as being very attractive. So very attractive women are not taking this, they are not perceiving this pregnancy pressure. Screw you, I can go get a different boyfriend in 5 minutes. So being very attractive is a buffer. These background characteristics did contribute, or these are random effects. So these are fixed effects, the partner characteristics, and I'm very confident in those. But only the women who had multiple partners contribute to those models, because it's comparing different partners within the same woman. So background characteristics, especially these are experiences with pregnancy. The respondent had an adolescent pregnancy. Those respondents with an adolescent pregnancy had higher probability of perceiving pregnancy pressure. Their mothers had teen pregnancies. And then I'm not sure what explains this, but the women who self-identified as Black or African American also had higher probability of perceiving pregnancy pressure. Okay, so those are the individual and partner stable characteristics and how they contribute to this experience. Now, these are the relationship level models. And these are ugly because so this first panel really doesn't have any action going on, but we have the same kind of setup where got the average marginal probability at the means, and here the dependent variable is coded at the week level. So like what's going on in that week, and does that change your probability? Did your probability of experiencing pregnancy pressure, did it change depending on what's going on in the relationship week to week? And this, like sex with other partners, really doesn't explain anything. But the relationship type did. And so what we have here are the blue bars are again the average marginal probability of the means, and then the average marginal effect of like the nature of the relationship is the orange bars. And because these things time vary, it's like a mean level of something. And so what I did was just code this piece to be one standard deviation above the mean. And so this is relationships that were engaged or married for more time, one standard deviation more time than the average relationship was engaged or married. So more serious relationships overall, higher probability of perceiving pregnancy pressure, and then especially within a relationship, once it became engaged or married, that also cranked up the probability. And so this is a comparing weeks before and weeks after. Duration, not much going on there. Broke up and reconciled is a variable at kind of the relationship levels. Like reconciled relationships seem to have more perceived pregnancy pressure. And then what I think is most interesting here is my very last two bars, fighting and assault. So relationships that were very conflictual, meaning they fought one standard deviation above the mean more than average, had a higher probability of involving perceived pregnancy pressure. And then while they were fighting also, it had those weeks had a higher probability of pregnancy pressure. And then also it co-occurred with assault. So in weeks with assault, women were much more likely to perceive pregnancy pressure. So some of that coercive control. So these were the scenarios. Just to summarize, individual and partner characteristics, respondents when they were older within this very narrow age range, respondents with less education, especially with also partners with low education, less attractive women had more perceived pregnancy pressure and pregnancy experiences. And then this tended to occur in serious, reconciled, conflictual, and violent relationships, especially during weeks with fighting or assault. Okay, that's the kind of the predictors of, and so let me return to my three respondents and tell you specifically about their relationships. Okay, Rebecca. She's the one who said he trapped me and she had the pregnancy with the prior partner. She said, were you guys, no, sorry. She said, so she's describing her relationship with this current guy. She said, it's like, I have questions about, does he have other females? Because he's just too secretive. Like, he don't want me knowing nothing. And he'd rather for me to be in the house. He don't want me working or going to school. He just wants me to be in the house because he doesn't want anybody trying to talk to me. It's like he doesn't even want me to talk to his friends. Like if I say hi, he'll catch an attitude. I don't know. It's kind of weird. But we don't go out, sorry, we don't go out or nothing. He says he doesn't like to go out, but he goes out with his boys. So Rebecca, an outstanding description of a very controlling partner who she perceived as wanting her pregnant, and now she is currently pregnant, and that's the scenario. Return to Samantha. Remember, she's the one in beauty school, and she said she wanted to get pregnant possibly after she finishes school. And this is what she told me about her relationship. She started off telling me about how great this guy is. And then about halfway through the interview with her, she said, okay, he put his hands on me 4 times. And she starts telling me about the times when he hit her. She said they were at a funeral, and they were at like the after party, the funeral after party, such a funny thing, like a family gathering, and it was at night and everyone was drinking. And he abruptly got angry and grabbed her arm and pulled her into his truck, and they drove. And she said, I'm sitting there thinking we're about to get groovy or something, back of the park, music's on. So then I didn't know what was happening. This is the first time we actually had a big argument, the first time for everything, meaning the first time he hit her. Nose bleeding, and he's like, yeah, you think I didn't see that? And I'm like, whoa, are you serious? You are so drunk right now. I'm like, you don't even hear yourself talking. I said, you know you're wrong. You know you're wrong. So that's a snippet of her description of her relationship with that partner. And then Hannah, the one who said her partner wanted a football team, and that was a past partner. This Hannah was a funny girl, and this was a past partner, so she laughed. She said, and his girl, his actual girlfriend, he was staying with, she could only have, I think she had 5, and then she got her tubes tied, but he wanted more. So I think he was just finding the next person to have kids with. He didn't want to leave her because she had a car and a house and was giving him money, buying him clothes. But then he also wanted me to have his next set of kids. I didn't have no kids at 17. I waited at least till I was 19. She was pregnant when we interviewed her, but not with that partner. She told the funniest story about her breakup with that partner, where she went to his actual, woman partner's house and looked in the kitchen, like the screen door, and saw her keys on the kitchen table. And the actual, mother of these 5 kids, who's probably like, what on earth, she's like, what do you want? She said, can I just get the keys to my apartment, please? They're right there on your table. And she did give her the keys, but then the boyfriend of both, I guess, came down and they argued on the front porch about whether to break up or not. So at his actual girlfriend's house. So that was Anna's partner. But I don't want to give the impression that all of these pregnancy pressure scenarios were just terrible. So sometimes this happened in serious, stable relationships with partners that these women did really like. And Cassandra told me, well, after they had their first child, after this kid turned 2, the partner told me he wanted to have another kid. I told him if he bought me a house that I'd have another kid with him. And like 3 weeks after that happened, we were looking at this house and we made a bid on it and they accepted our bid. And then like 3 weeks after that, I found I was pregnant. So, so sometimes I feel like there may be 2 scenarios here that are hard to pick apart with the survey data, which is, of course, we all compromise. If you're partnered, you've compromised, right? We don't always get what we want, and sometimes we voluntarily don't get what we want. So sometimes this is a part and parcel of violent coercion, and sometimes this is just simply compromise. These people were poor, so she wanted him to buy her house, but they were not wealthy people. But nonetheless, she voluntarily, caved into that pressure. Okay, so does it work? This is very quick. This is just from the discrete time weekly event history model and this is the adjusted weekly, so based on that model, weekly probability of pregnancy with all that stuff in the model by perceived pregnancy desire. And so the women who did not perceive pregnancy pressure, their weekly probability of pregnancy was 0.004. Of course, your weekly probability of pregnancy is quite low, so that's about right. It translates into a 19% probability over a period of a year, which is pretty reasonable. And that women who ever perceived pregnancy pressure, cannot read it, it's like 0.11. It's 0.11 something, so it's almost 3 times as high. And that translates to about a 0.437 probability over 1 year. So yes, This is subsequent pregnancies after experiencing pregnancy pressure, and it does seem to be followed by pregnancy. Okay, how does it work? I'm really almost done. One thing I wanted to mention is returning to Samantha. A lot of these women were Samantha. She couldn't remember whether that guy had 5 or 6 kids, 6 or 7 kids with 5 or 6 partners. She didn't know exactly how many kids, and she didn't know exactly how many partners. And all of those partners and babies he lived in this neighborhood. It was like an apartment complex, and he lived in this neighborhood with all of these kids and all of these mothers. And so you might think to yourself, like, how on earth could he convince another woman to have a baby with him, right? Because he's not with any of those mothers, he's with her. And so one of the tactics that these women explained is she told me that he wants to move, and because he's not local, and she said he was a real mama's boy. And he's from another state. So his plan was Samantha's plan was the two of them would move to this other state where he's from and live near his mother. And all of these other kids and the moms, if they wanted to come too, would come along on this move. And he wanted her to get pregnant now. She told me he doesn't want to wait. He wants to now, because we planned on moving exactly after I finished school. We're supposed to be moving because he wants the child to be born where he's from. And so this was a super common tactic that they described because that baby was going to be special. Like none of these other babies were born where he was born, and this one was going to be, and that was going to be very special. So she felt like her baby, is not just number 8 with mother number 7, it's special. And so this was common. This baby will be special because of I have 2 boys and I want a girl, or the mother, I don't get along with the mother of those babies and we have something special, or I don't see those kids because the mother moved away with them. And so I'm going to be involved with these kids. So this was like a specialness tactic, and it worked by convincing the young women that they wanted to get pregnant, right? So it wasn't coercion in that, I don't know there's a fine line. So it wasn't like they, raped them and refused to use contraception and got them pregnant against their will. It was more of a persuasive tactic. Which is not to say that they did not rape them. So back to Samantha, after that argument they had in the back of the park, she said, remember she was saying, you're so wrong, you're so drunk, you don't even know what you're talking about. And she's telling me he was wrong. That's why we wanted to have sex after all that. And I said, oh, so did you have sex after that? And she said, yeah, we did. We did. I didn't want to, but he's so big, I can't say no to anything. You're going to flip me over with your pinky. He's strong. So, okay. So yeah, it happened. So there was non-consensual sex involved in some of this pregnancy coercion. And also you would not be surprised at all to know that there's contraceptive coercion. Back to Rebecca, who was pregnant with her second pregnancy. Remember, her partner had died during the first pregnancy. She said, when I had her, the first baby, I was talking to my doctor about the IDU. She means IUD. What's funny is I told the partner about it and he was like, don't you need to talk to me first about that? And I'm like, why? I don't need no more kids right now. And she said, he told her, I don't want you to go on birth control right now. I want to get to the point of having kids. And then after that, we can talk about it. So, and she was pregnant with him. So it worked. And then another example, Amber, again, to try to provide some balance here, even though I did really cherry pick these cases because they're so illustrative. Amber said, like, this is a steady relationship where she was not ready to have another baby. Their lives were kind of a mess. And she said, like, he just took it upon himself to not pull out, just, to cause more problems onto the problems. So that's how it went. It's crazy. And she was currently pregnant. Okay, I'm at the end. So thank you very much for your patience. So what did we learn today? I think we learned that women in general the women in my sample perceived their partners as more desirous of pregnancy than they were themselves, not tremendously, but meaningfully and importantly, especially in their most serious relationships with less educated partners, and especially during times of conflict and physical assault. Perceived pregnancy pressure was indeed followed by an increase in pregnancy. Sometimes it was a wanted pregnancy at that point, even though it started off with pregnancy pressure. She came around to wanting the pregnancy, and sometimes it was unwanted pregnancy. It feeds into what I've learned over the past 15 years in this project overall, which is that during this phase of life, 18 to 22, the transition to adulthood, the most serious relationships that the women in my study experienced were bad. They had the most conflict, they had the most violence. Those women in those serious relationships expected to have the least control over their lives, especially their reproductive lives. They flat out expected to have unwanted sex and expected to not be able to use the contraception that they wanted to use. And indeed, they had more unwanted sex, and they did use less contraception than they wanted to use, even when they did not want pregnancy. And they had more unwanted pregnancies. So serious relationships at this point in the life course for these respondents were not good. Oh, that's the end. Thank you.